Evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's 911. And for tonight's 911, Knife 911, we have the Grimsmo Norseman here. Now, I just want to say that this was before we get into the 911, that this was my first Grail knife type purchase. And I still get that feeling every time I pocket this thing because it's just so good in so many ways. And you'd think I'd have more to say about a knife that's just so good in so many ways, but I really don't. It's kind of surprising. There's so much to say and so little. Anyway, let's get into it. 911 on this guy is that it's a CNC artist's creation. Really, that's most of the 911. It's pretty simple. I mean, it's a form we all are familiar with. It's a frame locking flipper. But other than that, it's the CNC quality and the CNC milling that make this knife what it is. Every single little part on here has been agonized over by a CNC artist. And the Grimsmo brothers, or at least one of the Grimsmo brothers, is the kind of CNC artist who really flaunt it at you. They really flaunt the milling. See these little graduations right here? Right. All of this is done on a CNC mill. None of this really could be done with a grinder, or at least it could sort of kind of get close with a grinder, but not in the way that this thing looks and in all of its stylistic choices and everything like that. And for this kind of build quality and that picture of drop shuttiness, it's just so good. The action on this thing is the other part of this 911. It's just out of this world. And I've got a lot of knives, and some of them are really quite high-end knives, and I've flipped a lot of other people's knives, and this one, I don't think I've ever run across a knife that had a better action than this one. And we'll get into that a little more later. But anyway, so on to the intake. So first impressions are unremarkable. And I say that because if you don't really know what you're looking at, right, the knife is kind of unremarkable looking. It's a knife much like many others. You get into it, you see some close tolerances. Okay, that's a pretty fine tolerance there. There's not much space between those scales and that blade. Okay, and you look at it and then you flip it. Whoa. And you realize that there's this sensation of rotating mass about the pivot that no other flipper in my collection really has, or at least they don't do it as cleanly as this one does. And no other flipper that I've handled has an action which talks to you the way this action does. You can feel everything that's going on there. And it's got good, solid, chunking feedback, but it doesn't overpower the handle of the knife. And look at that repeating drop shuttiness. Thank you, Nick Shabazz, for that word, because that word was created for this knife, and boy, does it need it. So, getting a little further into it, this blade shape, it really is best described as a recurve tanto with a convex tip in 2 dimensions and a concave flat in 2 dimensions. It's concave this way and it's concave this way. It's convex this way on the tip and this way on the tip. It's concave this way and it's concave this way here. So in 2 dimensions, that's why we have this relief line right here, which demarcates the difference between the two. But all of this is CNC machined. And really, leaving these graduated lines in here, you really can't duplicate this knife with a grinder. You just can't do it. Not and leave it the way it is. And every single little part of this thing has been agonized over. The thumb stud, which doesn't get used very often. The pivot cover right here, the backside of this screw has a Norseman, the Grimsmo emblem in it. The little tiny dots inside the screws for the spacers. And the spacers themselves, if you look at them, they're just beautifully made. And same goes for the clip, this wavy line for the lock bar. And everything's just really, really, really nice. And it's just nicely done. But if you don't know what you're looking at, you may not see all these things right off the bat. Anyway, moving on. Blade steel is RWL 34. Every Norseman is marked with what blade steel it has. And this one is RWL 34 right here. It's number 1083 with a acid stonewash on the blade and the blue anodizing with a stonewash on the scales. But that blade steel was not really chosen for its performance. It was chosen for its point of origin, which is Sweden. RWL 34, it's roughly equivalent to Carpenter's BD4, Crucible's 154 cm, or Hitachi ATS 34. None of these will take the kind of edge that S35VN or S30V will, but they're not going to hold it like those two steels either. But I mean, performance is acceptable. It's considerably better than 8CR13 MOV, which I've had to sharpen a lot of. Anyway, that's the lowdown on the steel. The blade profile, oh god, it was a full 2.5 bitches to sharpen. With any system other than the ones that I'll tell you about in a little bit. I've got a Wicked Edge Gen 3 Pro sharpener, which I absolutely love for 98% of my knives. I've got stones, I've got rods, I've got diamond stones, whetstones, Japanese whetstones. I mean, you name it, I've got it. As far as the, well, that's not quite true. I mean, I don't have most of the guided systems, but I have had quite a few. And, you know, I've got quite a few methods to sharpen a knife, but the only thing that I really like sharpening this thing with is the pocket strops that I picked up recently. You know, I picked them up something as just to have in the bag where if I was bored, I could sharpen a knife. Well, I sharpened this thing, and it turns out that those little pocket strops and the micro strops that I use for finishing, those things are the best tools to sharpen this type of blade, because it doesn't, they're small enough where it doesn't matter if it's recurved, right? You can still get a really good edge with those things, and you can do it, you know, with a minimum of fuss and a minimum of cost. So I really am very impressed with those two products, the micro strop and the pocket strop. And really, they did this knife a world of good, which I'm very, very happy with. So, this type of blade profile, I think Nick Shabazz is right when he says, you know, you really should try carrying some of these off the beaten path blade shapes, because you might figure out that they're good for certain things that other types of blades aren't, you know, don't excel at. And I think he's right insofar as that this thing is a surprisingly good performer, even for being such an oddball. It passes the apple and cheese test for me, which is one of my most important things. I like apples and cheese. You know, when I look for there is when I cut the wedge out of the apple with this part of the blade, I don't want it to split the apple apart because it's a Medford, but I'm not going to do that with a Medford anyway. But you get my point, is that I don't want it splitting the apple apart because the stock's way too thick. So this part of the blade is beautiful for that. And when you're slicing off pieces of cheese, having this concave tip just allows the cheese to just nicely separate and fall right off. And so having these graduations, these CNC milling graduations, is a really good thing for that. I didn't think it would be, but they are. The profile of this thing is extremely thin, you know, at 4/10 of an inch wide. That's it. It's really quite thin, and it's a wonderful thing. You know, it just sort of disappears into your pocket for a knife so large. Oh, there's that drop shuttiness again. And speaking of your pocket, it pockets so easily with this clip, and it takes a really great clip like this one to show you that clips can be great. This one is just terrific. It's just perfectly executed. It's got the perfect amount of tension on it. It always goes into the pocket easily. It's just great. Grimsmo Brothers, thanks for keeping it simple and refraining from adding everything that doesn't need to be there. Right. Comes with tools and lube, which is a great thing. It's custom. Everything in here is sort of custom made in-house, and you know, same for all of its hardware. So, you know, slow clap, Grimsmo Brothers. Anyway, we'll stop. Takes a knife like the Norseman to prove that folders, in a generality, can always be improved upon. And it makes me wonder where folding knives will go and where they're going to advance to in a year or 5 years or 10 years out. If we're here now, or we were here in 2014, how do we improve on these? What's our next thing going to be in 2 years? What's going to be the it knife that we've all got to have because it's got some advance? Those are my thoughts for, you know, down the road with this thing. But anyway, the dispatch is that if you've got the money for one of these things, I think there really is no better way to spend it on a knife. This is something that everybody should experience who's a knife nut. at least once in your life, experience a Norseman, because really there's nothing like it. The Rask is the same way. I'm told it's, I don't have a Rask. I'd love to have one, but I don't. But yeah, get your hands on one of these if you can, because it'll just teach you what the pinnacle of this sort of thing can be in terms of action. All right, everybody, that's tonight's Knife 911. Out.